Good morning, 24th Sunday of Ordinary Time, and we read the Gospel of Mark. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly and with frankness. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If anyone wishes to come after me, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it." I can explain the life of Marilena Bosio, a young 26-year-old veterinarian who gave her own life to save a child from the icy waters of Lake Cardiel in Argentina. But if the person explaining it is the mother of the 8-year-old boy whom Marilena saved by giving him her life jacket when her boat capsized in a sudden storm, she will surely explain it differently. Why? Because Marilena saved her son. There are things which we relate intellectually with the intelligence, but they really transform us when they touch our heart, when we experience how that reality touches me personally. It's not the same to understand an idea, which is an act of the mind, than living it, which is an act of the whole person. It's not the same thing to understand a value, for example, to understand with the mind that it's good to be generous, than to live the virtue of generosity, to give up something of mine to give it to others. In today's Gospel, Jesus asks his disciples not only what they understand with their minds about him, but how they are living their relationship with him, with their whole person. Caesarea Philippi, where this dialogue takes place, was a city located at the base of Mount Hermon, near the headwaters of the Jordan River. Originally called Panias, this city had been the center of worship for the Greek god Pan. When King Philip the Tetrarch took control, he made it the administrative capital of his region, Iturea, and renamed it in honor of Caesarea of Philippi. Jesus uses with his disciples the Socratic teaching method called maiotics. It comes from the Greek word maietikos, which can be translated as helper in labor. Maiotics is a method or technique that consists of asking questions to a person until he or she discovers concepts that were hidden in his or her mind. The technique of maiotics assumes that the truth is hidden in the mind of each person, and through the dialogue and questions, the person himself develops new concepts from his answers. By first asking the disciples who the other thinks he is, Jesus gives them space to consider what they have heard. Then, by asking them what they think, it allows them to consider the evidence for themselves. The Jews didn't believe in reincarnation, so when people say that Jesus is John the Baptist or Elijah or Jeremiah or any of the other Old Testament prophets, they didn't mean that Jesus was literally one of the ancient prophets, but they meant that he came with the same purpose and ways, with the same power and authority, and with a similar message. In the dialogue, Peter comes to his answer, "You are the Messiah." And Jesus tells him, "This knowledge that you have found within you doesn't come from you, but it has been given to you as a gift. The fact of discovering within you a knowledge not acquired through your own effort makes me think of the gift of the Holy Spirit of wisdom, which makes us discover and taste in an experiential way what God is like. It's not a conquer or acquire wisdom, it's a received one. It's an experience that God gives. Finding my own answer to who is God for me is not an intellectual process in which in the end God remains a distant entity, but an experience. Jesus then decides to polish, nuance, and correct the apostles' concept of the Messiah. He shares with them something that it's really very difficult for them to understand. He blows away their mental schemes. The Gospel says that Jesus speaks with frankness, which comes from the Greek word parrhesia and means with freedom of speech. Parrhesia represents the ability to freely express one's thoughts without fear of negative repercussions, even if what one is going to say is uncomfortable for the listeners. It's not a matter of speaking just because, but of speaking the truth. However, Jesus' clear words still cannot overcome Peter's preconceived idea of who the Messiah should be. Whenever Jesus tells the disciples that he's going to die, the disciples have very difficulty accepting the idea. Here, Peter claims to have authority over Jesus. At another point, the 12 argue about who is the most important among them. Even John and James ask for special places of honor. The crucifixion is the culmination of self-sacrifice, humility, and love. But the 12 still don't want to admit the fact that their master won't be the king they expected him to be. Jesus answers Peter, "Depart from me," but it's curious. In Greek, the Gospel says, "Opiso mu," which literally means behind me. Why it's so curious? When Jesus first meets Peter and calls him, he says in Greek, "Deute opiso mu," come behind me, a phrase translated as follow me. Peter has been following Jesus ever since, despite his imperfections. But in rebuking Jesus, Peter stands in front, wanting to lead him. Now, Jesus commands him to return to his proper place of discipleship, behind, following rather than leading. How difficult for Peter, and for us, to follow Jesus when the Master breaks our human logic. Whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me and the Gospel will save it. Profane writers, such as the Spanish writer Albert Espinosa, already expressed the mysterious relationship between lose and gain. Albert, speaking about mourning and grief, says, "Every loss brings its gain, you just have to wait for it." The same happens, and with more reason, with faith. When you let go of your own thoughts and criteria to incorporate those of the Gospel, when you stop wanting to guide God and start following Him, you may think at first that you are losing, but then, in time, you realize that your life is gaining. And God bless you.